Welcome everyone to Exploring Responsibly, a live conversation series that traverses our sense of accountability, our actions, and our philosophies around our relationships with nature and the world. The conversations happen live on Instagram and are then saved and redistributed in the hopes to reach more folks like you. I'm Gabachia, your host, and I want to thank you for being here. Alrighty, so my guest today is here. That's awesome. I just want to take a moment to welcome everyone again to episode 6 of Exploring Responsibly. I'm Gabachia, my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm tuning in live from the land of the Pueblo and Jicarilla Apache peoples, here also known as Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'm very excited to welcome Norma to this Instagram Live. Hi, Norma. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I just want to make space for you to introduce yourself. Tell us where you're tuning in from and your pronouns and all the good stuff.
Yeah, my name is Norma Chaides Hartel. My pronouns are she, hers, ella. And I know you requested to do a land acknowledgement, so I guess I had to write it down because the borderlands are, there's a lot of history.
Good. Oh, I
Um,
appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah, but I'm here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. We're on the ancestral and current homelands of the Warm Spring Apache, the Chiricahua Apache Nation, the Mescalero Apache, the Piro Manso Tiwa, the Tortugas Pueblo, and numerous other indigenous communities that I still need to, research and find out where we're at. We're in the Chihuahuan Desert, below the Organ Mountains, and along the Rio Grande River. I just wanted to add, because I know, everyone's like, we need to acknowledge these lands, but I encourage people to research the issues of those whose lands were stolen, to research the issues affecting the indigenous people in those lands, and as well as amplify the issues, and of course, try to financially support if you can, and then just to step it up a little bit further, maybe see who took those lands, because even here in Las Cruces, I know the university does a lot of land acknowledgements, but they don't do any steps forward to try to give that land back.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that is really valuable, and I think we start where we are, right? So as we attend, especially with virtual events, we get to hear a lot of indigenous names, which is something I really like about the practice of the land acknowledgement, just to get more used to hearing those names. Granted, a lot of them are colonizer names given to the indigenous peoples, and so, and on many occasions it's really good practice to just dive deeper into the history and also the current tribal establishment, and see how they like to be acknowledged and addressed and recognized. And definitely it doesn't stop there. There is a land back movement, and it is possible, and people shouldn't be scared about it. I don't know why there's also a narrative about being scared to give land back. I don't think there's anything scary about it. I think it's the right thing to do, and I really hope that the land back conversation continues to grow,
Right.
and
It's people
and we,
holding on
we
to
find that
power.
resolution.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
Interrupt.
It is about time. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just go in and ask you the question that I ask everyone at the beginning of this conversation, and that is just, what does exploring responsibly mean to you?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm a super nerd, so I wrote down notes. I'll be looking this way, but I'm paying attention over here. So I think, besides the plan ahead, leave no trash, respect wildlife, just how we talked about, I think people need to understand whose ancestral lands they're exploring, learn the history, learn what happened after the fact, for example, here in Las Cruces, after the Spanish and the Anglo came over, it literally changed the landscape. The river stopped flowing, and now we have the desert. Now we have the desert as we know it now, but it was drastically different. So just acknowledge those things, um, of how it also affects the environment. And then also, this is something I've done since I started exploring and hiking and camping, is acknowledge the privilege that you have. I mean, at least for people that are able to walk out into these lands. Not everyone is able to do this. And, I'm talking about ableism. So acknowledging that privilege. And then just from a more personal perspective is, I was once undocumented, so I was like not able to travel. So also acknowledging that not everyone is capable of doing that. And, just, it's a privilege, and yeah. So acknowledging that is awesome.
Thank you. No, I agree. Like, big part of the responsibility is just acknowledging what's your role in all of that too, right? So as much as understanding what happened in the past and how that affected what you get to experience today, it's also like, well, and what's your role? Like, especially as people who just get to go on hikes for fun, right? Like that is, I agree with you, a huge privilege that is not accessible or available to everyone.
Right. I mean, like even the National Park Service, I mean, at one point they didn't allow people of color, or people of color weren't accepted. And I feel like that's still in today's culture and world, because they have their green uniforms. They remind me of the military and border patrol. So I mean, there's still some times where I'm like, I don't want to go talk to that ranger. I don't want, they're scary
It's true.
to me.
Right. And that's, also uh, in the early phases of the National Park Service, it was definitely a military institution. So it still carries some of that, and they've definitely taken some steps, but there are many more that can be taken, for
Yeah.
sure. And since you bring that up, I want to tell everyone, because I was brushing up today on erasure language, and if you all go to the Indigenous Women Hike account, they have on their highlights a really valuable resource about erasure language, and how that is found a lot in National Park Service, specifically because they're always talking about Indigenous peoples as this past tense, whereas like, no, Indigenous peoples are around today, and they could very well come back and manage their sacred lands, which they were not sacred lands. They are sacred lands. They are sacred ceremonial grounds that we often go and take a hike on. So we have to be very mindful about that, and how our language also continues this like systemic erasure of the indigenous peoples of the United States.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not just the National Park Service, but the museum field as well, academia, a lot of things.
Absolutely. And those are your fields. So I'm really excited to dive into that side of the conversation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Norma and like who you are, your work?
More get ready. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so my name is Norma. I was born in Durango, Mexico, and I came to the US when I was 7 years old, and became undocumented when I was 12 or 13. That's, after 9/11 happened. So I think it was just really a difficult time for a lot of immigrants. Um, I became a permanent resident after I got married at 23, and then a US citizen at 29. But during those 10 years of being undocumented, I was living in Las Cruces, and I literally couldn't go anywhere. I, anyone who lives in the border in Las Cruces, El Paso region, that if you drive anywhere, you will encounter a checkpoint, or if you go south, there's the border. So for me, being undocumented at that time, that meant that I couldn't travel, without the possibility of maybe being detained and then deported. So I wasn't going to risk that. So I feel like that's where my, uh, I don't want to say passion. I'm like, that's such a beautiful word, but yeah, I guess whatever, for exploring and hiking came from, not being able to travel anywhere. So it was like, well, the mountains are there. El Paso's right there. And like, there are certain areas that I could go to. So that's where I started learning a lot about the land and like vegetation stuff, mostly through my mom. But then I also ended up getting really interested in art, and I think hiking and art were very therapeutic for me because I mean, it sucks being undocumented. I feel like it gets romanticized now, but yeah, it's traumatizing. It's a really hard situation to be in. So yeah, sympathy to all those struggling right now. Um, but yeah, I think out of that, I ended up going to school because I wasn't able to work. I had the privilege to even be able to go to school. I'm in debt now, but I was able to do it. Um,
Didn't we all?
I know, right? I was like, but I went and got my BFA in painting, and then later on, I got my master's in anthropology with the certificate in museum studies, and that's where I started off. I guess in my field now as museum curator. Um, I was actually when I was like looking at your questions and typing this up, just talking about land and how important it is to people. When I was in grad school, I actually nominated Chope's Bar and Cafe to be listed on the National Register. And that's a bar that's, I forget how many miles outside of Las Cruces, but it's on Highway
Mhm.
28. And it's historic because it's associated with the Bracero program of 1942. And I got really passionate about, trying to list it on the National Register because both my grandfathers were braceros, but
Oh, cool.
yeah, but I've been like realizing more and more lately, like doing a lot of historic preservation work is I was passionate because I think I was trying to place myself and my history to this land that, sometimes is not, especially if you're an immigrant, it's like, oh, this isn't your home, but it was like my connection, my way to connect my story and history to this area. So, and it was also like a fu to la migra, like guess what?
Yes, like, well, you could do it and you did it. So I'm proud of you. Do you want to, or, well, could you explain what braceros are for folks that maybe are not familiar with that term?
Yeah, so the Bracero program was a binational program that started in 1942 during the World War II, and it was a way to, because there was a lot of people fighting in the war, they had to get labor from somewhere. So the U.S. created Mexico, and the U.S. created a guest worker program that allowed Mexican people, especially men, to come work in the fields and the railroad in the United States. Yeah.
Thank you. So I have another question about you because your Instagram handle is Normita la Coyotita, and so I wanted you to just, if you want to, share with everyone what is a coyotita and how did you adopt that nickname for yourself?
What's this one? Coyotita. Yeah, so the Coyotitos is actually a nickname that was given to my mom's side of the family. Um, Instead of being referred to as Los Uriartes, which is their last name, they're known as Los Coyotes. And it's meant to be a derogatory term. Um, a lot of that, or at least the town that my family's from, there are a lot of elitist, classist, and racist Mexicans, and the coyote was used as a term for my family to put them down for being poor, but also being half native. But my family like ran with it, like they have trucks with like coyote in the back of it, and like T-shirts and like
Nice.
and stuff. So yeah, like my aunts and uncles and cousins, they're known as los coyotes, las coyotas, los coyotitos. That's what they refer to us, and of course, that's where I come from, and it's Normita la Coyotita.
Nice. I love that. And coyotes are such great beings.
Yeah,
Like I find it hard to think that people found a way to make that derogatory, but I'm also very uh, proud to know that you took it and you define it for yourselves, and it's kind of like part of the family pride too.
right. Yeah, and then I found out like up here in northern New Mexico, the coyotes are like tricksters. So I don't know, it makes sense. Like they're traviesos, and I love that. I'm like, yeah.
uh,
I'm a traviesa. I love it.
Yes, having fun. That's what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
So for you as, an immigrant that has studied art and anthropology, what does it mean to be a curator for you today?
Uh, yeah, I love being a curator. It means I get to learn about a lot of things. I get to interact with the community, and I get to bring stories and culture from a lot of different people to, this institution that's oftentimes seen as a very elitist place. So I'm slowly taking over. I'm just kidding. Yeah, yeah, I love being a curator. I love the work. It is hard sometimes because I'm the only person of color that's in a higher position in these museums down here, in a place where the majority is a Mexican population. So it is hard sometimes because a lot of times my story or like my experience gets dismissed, or
Mm.
the way I write, gets questioned a lot, but it's because I write for a certain culture, a certain type of people. So, when other Mexicanos come to the museum, they read it, they're like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. And they usually like explain or like start talking to me and want to have conversations. But um, there's a lot of people that don't like it. I've experienced a lot of racism, especially with the museum patrons. Um, I've been there's literally been people whenever they find out I'm the curator, they'll just walk out of whatever exhibit. I've overheard people once they found out I was a curator just say like, oh, she's probably illiterate. And yeah, just the horrible things from the community, which are your worst critics. But you
Wow.
just have to build tough skin and then remember why you're doing it. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you powering through that because that is, enough to discourage many people to be in that space. And I'm curious about that because museums are um, they are institutions, and um, they have done this job of placing art in this like pedestal that
Hmm.
it's often not an accessible pedestal, right? Like it's for certain kind of people. You have to know certain words to appreciate art or to talk about it. So what are some of your personal experiences kind of dealing with that as a woman of color, as an immigrant woman in this curator position?
Well, I try and little by little, I mean, museums historically, institutionally are racist from the way you are supposed to write to the way you display to the way you collect. I mean, a lot of artifacts are, known to be stolen in a lot of the um, major museums. But I guess my way of doing it is the way I write, the topics I pick. And you could tell like I'm the one curating because it's like an exhibit about lucha libre, or like it's like kind of artist, or I'm talking about like indigenous community, but like in a story way instead of like a very academic like boom boom boom. Let me tell you the facts. Um, so I think that's my way of slowly kind of working through that, but it's such a big monster to tackle. I think there just needs to be more Normas, and we all need to unite. And
Oh,
power
absolutely.
through
I
it.
hear you. You're like one little player in the giant board, and you're right in it, and it's really going to take a movement to start, I guess, decolonizing the museum, because that's really what it is. It's a colonial
Mhm.
construct on its own.
Yeah, and it's hard because I feel for all the other uh brown, black, BIPOC curators, because you're literally in the system. You have to work through it, right? Because you have to keep your job, and you're just trying to deal with the BS, but at the same time trying to work through all these things. And
Yeah, we got a question from Denise that says, do you think people are not used to experiencing intelligent women of color in high positions?
you know what? I don't think they are. I mean, aside from the museum patrons being horrible sometimes, I've worked with she's no longer working there, so I'm gonna talk crap. But there was a woman who thought I was a student for the longest time, and I was like, I've been working with you for like 3+ years, and you still think I'm like the student? Like, I think people are just like easy to disregard it and
Yeah.
try and like lower you without being intentional, but at the same time, keeping up with this colonial and hierarchy of white supremacy, of being like, oh, it's the brown person, they must be lower than me.
I know that's that I feel like since I moved here, I've experienced that just over and over again, where I I need to go 300 extra miles to validate the fact that my ideas are accurate and educated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes really difficult to, well, it's difficult to explain to a person that is not understand, like it doesn't have the awareness to understand that just because my skin is darker than theirs doesn't mean that my brain is smaller than theirs.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the issue. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's something like I feel like we and ourselves need to also work on, because I've been to conferences, museum related conferences, and then I see the señoras like cleaning up dishes, and like part of me is like, oh shit, like I'm one of the few brown people here. And, like there was one time I literally started helping these señoras like pick up the dishes at this conference, because I was like, I feel more comfortable in this space than like with these academics, but that's just fine too. Like I didn't mind it. I made friends that night.
Yeah, it's part of the experience always. And yeah, I think as long as you can find your place within that community, and you're not thinking that, oh, I am here as a presenter, therefore I cannot hang out with the señoras, I need to hang out with, you're not co-opting that culture of, we are the academics here and they are the ones that are servicing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, it's loaded when we talk about that. I think it's it's really challenging, especially when, and I mean, you've been here since you were younger, so potentially your experiences with language and definitions are very different than mine, but you've probably experienced it too, like you not knowing a word, people think, not understanding that that doesn't mean that you don't know a concept because you speak more than one language.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I tend to do with my museum writing. A lot of other museums or curators try and make it very floral and very academic, and I'm just like, aquí está, like this is what it is, and like, because I feel like the more people can understand it, the better the writing is.
Absolutely, and the more accessible it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So you, on top of being a curator, you also do, or on top of being a museum curator, you also do public art and art in mostly the Murals of Las Cruces project that you started. So I'm curious to
Mm-hmm.
hear from you, like, why public art and how that came to be.
Yeah, I'll just give you a little background on, I guess, how it started. It started as a project in school, one of your seminar classes where you have to create something, but I guess I took it too far. Um, and
You're still creating it.
yeah, I was like, yeah. Yeah, so it started off as documenting all the work progress administration murals, and those were the murals that were commissioned during World War II again, to try and aid with, to try and help the artists, basically. And I'm actually hoping the government will do something similar during this pandemic, because there's a lot of suffering artists and creators. Um, but yeah, after I was like documenting all these like murals from the 40s and 50s, like I was also a document or like looking at graffiti, and I was like, that should be documented too. So that's where this like project started. I was just like documenting everything I could in the city. um, and it came out of not just my passion for art, which I love, but I love murals because they're public messages and stories. to a lot of people, right? They're not in a museum where you
Mhm.
sometimes feel uncomfortable going to. They're out in the public. You can criticize, from your car or like, the sidewalk, which is beautiful. They're also very powerful. They could be used as tools for civic engagement, um, to, highlight inequalities or tell the true history. Um, but at the same time, they can be used for propaganda and to control a certain historic narrative. I mean, it's not a coincidence we have so many Confederate and Spanish colonial monuments, right? Like those are there for a reason.
Right.
So that's why I love graffiti too. I feel like it's an act of resilience, and I want to see more of it.
Yes. As long as it's not on top of petroglyphs and
Oh
very
yeah, of course. Yeah, no, those are the dumb graffiti writers.
yeah, no. Not that graffiti, but like intentional, very well thought, like
Yeah,
graffiti with purpose.
go tag the bank. Your federal building.
Oops. This did happen live on Instagram, folks.
I was like, oh, shut up now.
Just kidding for sure. So when you're doing historic preservation work and curation, what are some ways in which you ensure that diverse voices are included and valued?
um, well, that's something that I've just been talking a lot with my colleagues. We're actually working on a white paper report right now. Ashley Ann Perez and Dr. Galavis, probably some of the most intelligent people that I know. But we've been having a lot of conversations and writing about how the historic nomination process is kind of biased, and a lot of voices have to go through a lot of loopholes in order to get something nominated. Um, and then just to give you an example, I think only 8% of designated landmarks are represent the stories of like Native Americans, Latinos, uh, African Americans, Asian Americans, women, and other underrepresented groups. I'm like, that's only 8%. Like everything else is probably like the president's like
Uh-huh.
weekend house or some stupid thing like that. Um, and yeah, I think just rethinking the nomination process. The nomination process is has four different criteria: A, B, and C. A is like for a property that's associated with a significant event. So Chopis was designated under criteria A. B is associated with someone that's very important, like a president.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, C is I call it the cute building category because it's
A
like
beautiful.
yeah, it's a beautiful building basically. And D is sites that hold information. So a lot of like petroglyph sites are listed under criteria D. And then on top of that, they have to be 50 years or older in order to be designated.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so people like me, like we migrate, we create stories in a lot of different places. So I think that doesn't reflect the important history of us because we move around a lot. Also, these places are tangible. Um, Sometimes our stories are more important than this one building, or it might be just a little casita that is not cute, not a cute building, but it's important to a certain community or certain group of people because of the story and history behind it. So I think rethinking the designation process and adding more categories, or just yeah, getting rid of it, rethinking it I think is the way to include more voices um, in our narrative.
I think that category about the important person is really interesting because and that has always been why history rubbed me the wrong way, because it's always about this one guy doing this one thing, or and it's like, well, what about the entire people? Like what
Right.
are like you said, well, any neighborhood could be designated historic because can you imagine all the people that have lived here and built their homes, or just watch their kids grow through a whole era? I mean, that is the real history, right? Like people living through the consequences of the choices of the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah. So
ultimately,
yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I think just beyond like nominating, it's like rethinking the whole process. Like, how do we get our voices out there in like in our perspective, our way of telling story, and our way of documenting history? Yeah, let's redo
yeah.
it.
Well, I know, right? And so I think, why do you think it's only 8%? Because obviously we are not 8% of the population. If you think of, Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, indigenous peoples, like we're not the 8%. So why only 8% of sites are really directly designated in relation to our experiences?
I think it's all the loops that you have to go through to designate something, right? Criteria A, B, C, D. And of course, each state is different. So each state has their own historic preservation, and then it goes to the federal level. So, I mean, right there within the state, like who knows who's in your government who might just be like, no, this is decides that it's not historic enough, you know? So just jumping through those hoops is a lot. There needs to be more of a streamlined place or way to do it. Also, a lot of historic preservationists, just like curators, they're thought to be old white men. And that's not the truth. I mean, anyone can be a curator and anyone can designate anything to be historic. And so that idea of like you have to be an academic or whatever to even nominate a site just needs to go. Like anyone can do it. It's your history. You probably know more about it than, you know, someone else that's a historian or whatever.
Yes, I think thanks for bringing that up, because that's what I was getting at too, thinking, well, maybe there aren't enough people of color that are, or that even know, like how would we even know that we can designate a historic site? Like I'm very curious now that I've met you and you're like, anyone can designate a site, and I'm like, I have to look that up. Like if I ever see a site that I'm like, I that needs to be preserved, like I had no idea I could do something about that, right? Because I've always thought like, oh, there's institutions that take care of that, right? Or it's the authorities that are designating those sites. So I think it's really cool to know folks like you that are empowering other people to say, hey, if you see something that's of value to your community, try to get that sealed, like, right, like
Yeah.
get that on paper and make sure that everybody else is also able to enjoy it and to learn about that heritage.
Yeah, and then I think on top of that, working with a lot of communities doing historic preservation work, like they're just like, I don't want the government like to do anything with my property or my neighborhood, not only because of gentrification, but like the things that you have to deal with when the government gets involved. There's a lot of mistrust. So I think even on top of that, there needs to be a way to protect these sites without getting the government involved, and that's just something else we can build upon.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting. Do you have any experience with like a community preserved area or site?
Um, yeah, but I don't want to talk about it right now because I don't want to. Yeah, because talking with or working with communities it's about building trust too. You don't want to come in as like, hey, like let me help you out. Um, but yeah, there are some. And I'll leave it
Cool.
at
It's
that.
it's good to know. You don't have to do
Yeah,
details. That's totally fine.
yeah.
So community continues to come up in our conversation. So what's the importance of community to you?
I don't know. Community, community is just
Well, we are
so.
all in the computer today, so I
Yeah,
get
no,
it.
it's like the computer. Yeah, it's just really important to me. I feel like that's all I do with like curating murals project, the historic preservation work that I do. Um, it all involves community. It's all about community, and it's, because for me at least I've been taught that community will eventually take care of you, so you got to take care of your community in whichever way you can. So that's why it's important. And it's like a simple explanation, but I mean, it's true.
No, I totally agree. No, I mean, we didn't we didn't get to be who we are without a community.
Mm-hmm.
That's for
Exactly.
sure. How have you been able to find your community here?
I think that's why I do a bunch of things, right? Like I'm just like, also I'm Sagittarius. I'm like an introvert, extrovert. I like to be in every, yeah, in everything. Um, yeah, I mean, as I've been growing up, I'm growing up. I've been finding my community in a lot of different places, whether it's like other Latino or brown women, like also interested in history, like nerding out about curating public
Yeah.
art and like the importance of place. Um, and then like I guess a way that I'm trying to help out is, I'm very open about once being undocumented, because when I was undocumented, like I didn't know any other undocumented folk, and I was just like, it was scary for me. Even going to my classes on campus, there's one time where I saw one of the border patrol trucks, and I was like, I guess I'm not going to school today. Like I just turned around, just out of that fear. But if I would have known someone, maybe someone in a higher position when I was a student, I think that would have helped me out a lot and would have given me a lot of hope. So that's one of the reasons I'm very open about it, and try and help out, especially my immigrant community, undocumented people that I know, because it's a struggle. You got to be there for each other.
Oh, I agree. And I can only imagine it being so isolating to, not having anyone else to reach out to that has had that same experience that you're having, but then also not being able to openly go around and say, hi, I'm undocumented.
Hmm. Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah, that's definitely a barrier I would see folks in those situations having to deal with as, navigating being here. Do you have any like advice for people of color in particular that are interested in doing historic preservation or art?
Um, I guess with historic preservation, like I mentioned, it's anyone can do it. You don't have to be an academic or, um, a historic preservation expert. Just, yeah, just look into it. I mean, I guess if I'll leave my information out there because I learned about this through school and I'm still learning about it, like the criteria and all the BS that goes with it, all the loopholes. But once you know it and once you get a community behind you, like, yeah, there's no stopping you.
Get preserving.
Yeah, let's preserve everything. Or not, whatever the community wants. Um, and then, yeah, I guess public art. I mean, I don't know. I guess if that's people's passion, then public art is everywhere. That's the beauty about it. It's people don't realize it, but it's like everything you see is a message of public art.
Yes, 100%. Looping back into the responsibility piece, how would you describe a responsible relationship with, like, you as a curator to an artist?
Like
Yeah,
the
like how,
responsibility.
yeah, like how, what does it look like to, I guess, approach curation with responsibility?
Oh, I mean, I'm, the way I see it is I'm working for the artist, right? Or whoever's exhibiting. I'm just guiding them on how to display stuff. Um, so if we're exhibiting an artist or exhibiting about a certain topic, I make sure whose ever topic it is, their voice is included in that. And I just guide them, with writing or displaying. Just as a museum nerd, no one reads page long paragraphs, right? And that's the difficulty about writing. Museum writing is that you have to get all this information and like boil it down to like a paragraph max. So I mean, that's just what I do with artists and people that are exhibiting. That's my responsibility, is just to guide them and ultimately let their voice be heard and let their stories be told.
Thanks for sharing that.
Hmm.
I think I have just one final question, and is what brings you the most joy out of working with in curation and public art?
Oh, again, I'm an introvert, but I'm also an extrovert. Introvert, extrovert. I love working with people. I love listening to all the stories and you know, that people have in our community. I'm such a nerd. I love learning, and I like getting to know people, and I think that's the most like rewarding thing to me, is getting to know all these people, artists, and I get to look at a lot of art, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's probably super fun. Do you have a favorite piece of art that you've encountered in all your years of working?
um, they come and go, but right now I'm putting up an exhibit by Chicana artist Sonya Fe, and her work is it. I hope she's not like listening or doesn't hear this, but it doesn't photograph very well. When you look at the photographs, you're just like, eh. But then you see them in person, and they're these 7 foot by like 5 feet. They're almost murals, right? Like mural size
Right.
things. And they're just so beautiful with like layers of paint and texture and all the different colors. I wish I could show it right now so people would know what I'm talking about. But her pieces right now are my favorite.
Well, will you give me a link so I can put her in the comments and then the show notes, and folks can look her work up? Because but I agree, and a lot of art is like that, where you see a photo and like you can appreciate some of it, but it definitely requires that kind of being present to really see uh, more, because you get to see more of the artist's personality that way too. Like you're saying, like maybe you see a photo of this thing, but then when you see it live and it's like a 7 foot something, you're like, what? uh, that's obviously going to change how you perceive it, the piece.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's another cool thing about my job. I'm the one who handles the artwork. I'm just like, I've handled like not a Picasso, a Dali little piece before. That was probably the most expensive thing. I was like, oh.
I would, yeah. I mean, I'll be the person at the Dali Museum trying to touch the stuff with my energy because I can't touch it with my hands.
I mean, you can't touch it with your hands, but I mean, I have to wear gloves, but I'm like, is
Well,
this
you touch it, but yeah, no, no.
okay? It's awesome.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that you want to share with folks that are tuning in?
No, just go check out Murals of Las Cruces. The account got deleted last year, so I'm like trying to gain little followers this year. Yeah,
It got
different stuff.
deleted?
Yeah, it was yeah. It
Hmm.
was
Was that like Instagram took it down? No, we're getting it back.
it's fine. It's starting again, so it's like building momentum and yeah, it's just me on the page now, and it's not a nonprofit, so I'm like,
Okay.
if I want to talk crap about whatever I want, then I get to do it.
Oh, that's very smart. So it's at Murals of LC, right?
Hmm.
Great. I'm
Yep.
posting it in the comments so people can look it
Cool.
up and follow along. There's a lot of cool murals happening, so I hope everybody gets a chance to check them out. And if ever, and anyone ever cruises by Las Cruces,
Yeah.
definitely go on a tour.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but other than that, just thank you.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been really cool to get to know you, and maybe we can go on a hike sometime.
Yeah, I'm
That would
down.
be cool. Yes, we're kind of long distance neighbors, but I'm sure I'll find excuses to go south because the the border area is so beautiful, and it it is magical down there. I don't think people realize that exists in New Mexico and that that's a place to visit, but it definitely is.
Yeah, oh my God. Sorry, I'm like, I'm not done yet. Yeah, Nuestra Tierra, I mean, Angel, and
Yes.
we took a group of teenagers to San Cristo Mountain that's like right on the
Oh,
border. And they're like, oh my God, there's border patrol. And you're like, yep, just an intimidation tactic, but just explaining to them like the history of the border and like just like how beautiful and like binational it is. They were just like, so that was awesome.
Oh, that's yes. Go. I know. I really appreciate Nuestra Tierra because it's thanks to Angel that I've been down in the border here and seen that just beautiful landscape and the tactics that you're talking about too, where I was like, really? You need that many border patrols? Because I
Yeah,
haven't seen a person in like, I mean,
right. I was like, they get paid to hike and then just sit in their truck for a while, but
ugh, yeah.
right.
There's so many, but there were so many of them. I was like, that you would think that I don't know I don't know what they would need that many border patrols for, but anyhow,
Yeah,
anyhow,
unnecessary.
I yeah, I appreciate you sharing so much with us today. I hope everybody gets a chance to go follow Norma's adventures and Murals of Las Cruces adventures. So I'll definitely add those links on the show notes for everybody to go and have a look at some art and some conservation stuff as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everyone. And if you miss any of these live conversations, they all live on my IGTV and they also eventually get posted on my blog and with a transcript that is obviously artificial intelligence generated transcript. So it's not perfect, but in the hopes that it can also be more accessible to more people. So stay tuned. I'm about to post this on the IGTV. Yes, there is Norma's handle at Normita underscore la underscore coyotita. And I will spell it out in the show notes for everyone so you can easily find her and all the fun stuff that she's working on. Thank you again, Norma. I'll see you soon,
Yeah,
I
thank
hope.
you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Exploring Responsibly is 100% generosity powered, so please go and check out our guests' work and support them. All relevant links can be found in the show notes. If you want to support this space further, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/Gabachia. I'm Gabachia, your host, and I once more want to thank you for being here.